Good afternoon. I would like to thank Terumo for inviting me to this presentation, and I want to also thank the audience for being paying attention to this session. I'm going to talk about the impact of different pathogen reduction technologies, and the next slide that you will see is the disclaimer of the companies for whom I have received honorary consultant fees. First of all, it's necessary to talk about why do we need pathogen reduction technologies. It has been 40 years since we discovered that there was an acquired immunodeficiency syndrome that was causing a strange disease at the time. 2 years after, it was discovered that was caused by HIV for the human immunodeficiency virus. And then we learned the hard way that it was transmitted by blood and by blood components. So there was an immediate action. It took years, but it was an action to prevent and to improve the safety of blood, to be prepared for these events not to take place in the future. Basically, what it was done, it was an increase in development of a new test for the detection of the diseases, of new diseases, and introducing inactivation techniques for plasma-derived products. In the case of platelets, platelets are several components more sensitive than plasma to be treated, and we need pathogen reduction technologies in platelet transfusion because we know that because of the storage time, or the storage temperature, there is bacterial growth that we want to prevent with disease. That action will allow to prolong the shelf life of the platelet concentrate for 7 days. Will reduce the risk of infections that we have not detected through current testing, and we will prevent that with an additional safety layer against emerging blood-borne infectious diseases. And then there is a reflection, and there is a thought in there: is the COVID-19 pandemic teaching us something about preparedness? Well, we have been crying wolf that there could be pandemics in the future that could be transmitted by blood. It seems that COVID-19 is not transmitted by blood. It has induced a shortage of products. But there will be one infection, one endemic, one pandemic that will be transmitted by blood, and we should be ready. And pathogen reduction technologies applied to cellular components will be helpful. What are the technologies available? The plasma, the solvent detergent, and the plasma, and the methylene blue were not helpful for platelets. So basically, what the techniques that have been available are the intercept, Mirasol, and the more recent, the Theraflex. Basically, all the techniques use UV light, and in some cases, in the intercept, use a photosensitizer that is a motosalen, and for Mirasol, the sensitizer is riboflavin. Theraflex don't use sensitizer, but uses a special bag with a thickness that has been reduced so that the components can be irradiated while the bag is shaking. This is basically the outline of my presentation. I will talk about the sterilization in standard PCs, the impact of pathogen reduction technologies, and I will try to summarize in a critical appraisal of the and future directions. Okay, this is a summary. In 2019, we prepared a review that was published in Transfusion, and with Dr. McCullough, we'll review what is the sterilization in standard platelet concentrates. Basically, we can talk about how we evaluate the in vitro quality of these components. In a sense, if you have you see the platelets, that they go from a discoid shape to a spherical shape, and that is platelets that have been stored for 5 days. Then, if you perform studies on biochemical studies, ultrastructural damage and receptors activation markers, I will consider these 3 boxes in the middle as indirect test of platelet function. And I say indirect because They provide information, but they don't tell us if platelets adhere, aggregate, or are propolar. And the box underneath is the functional responses. But I'm going to be critical, summarize in a critical way what are the findings. The findings are that there are changes in the metabolism of the platelets. There is a reduction in glucose and enhancement in lactate, changes in the pH, reduction in pH, and then changes in the different gases that can be measured in the blood bags, in the concentrates. That is followed, or it takes at the same time. There is ultrastructural damage with a loss of discrete shape. We see it in the picture above. Reduction in the swell and reduction in the hypotonic shock test, and reductions in the platelet counts. This goes along with reduction in presence of glycoproteins, enhanced expression of p-selectin and CD63, and enhanced propolar activity. And as following all these events, there is a reduction in the aggregation, and reduction in adhesion, and an enhanced in propolar action. And that has been very well established for the current platelet concentration and storage. So this is the storage lesion that has been communicated. Now I would like to go to the second part of my talk, the biochemistry and the function. Okay, in a recent work with Dr. Jem McCollum and with Maribel Díaz-Ricard, my colleague in Spain, what we did a systematic review of the literature using the term pathogen reduction technology, platelet concentrates, biochemistry, platelet function, and amoxicillin and midazolam, and we came up with 53 publications. And you can see that that 20 studies were publications on Intercept, 23 studies were on midazolam, and 5 studies were on Theraflex. And we also find 5 studies that compare Intercept with versus midazolam. Basically, what you can see in this scheme is that the studies have basically focused on metabolism, morphology, platelet count. And one thing that you recognize is that probably there is more information on midazolam than on Intercept. Probably because Intercept was the first and has obtained approval of the FDA. And there has been more interest, more scientific interest in midazolam. Theraflex has been is more recent technology, and there are fewer publications available. You see that there is a blue line and a red line, and then the blue line is telling that the amount or the proportion of studies that they have used indirect measurements, metabolism, morphology, flow cytometry, and in the red arrow you can see those that have concentrated in functional aspects of platelets. Basically, you can see that the number of studies that have focused in the functional aspect of platelets are lesser than the ones that have concentrated in metabolic or indirect tests. Why? Probably because they are more difficult to perform and they need more advanced laboratory techniques. It would be impossible for me to cover this, so I'm going to just present a few examples of some of these publications. The first one that I want to show was on Intercept using Buffy codes, and it was presented in 2004 by Susan Picker. And basically, you get the recognizable pattern of changes. In a sense, a reduction in glucose, as you see by the arrows, and reduction in the pH, and an enhanced presence of lactate, meaning that there is a metabolism, an acidic problem in the developing in these concentrates. That goes with alterations in LDH, changes and reduction in the osmotic shock resistance, expression of CD62, and if you look at the top bottom of the aggregation, I want to tell you that the aggregation test that she was using in that study is ristocetin. So ristocetin is not a real aggregating agent; it's an agglutinating agent. So changes in the ristocetin-induced aggregations are not very meaningful for this. studies. Following example I want to show is mirasol. That one was applied to Buffy-Coat, and in this case, there was a platelet additive solution introduced. As you can see, basically, in the two left columns, you see that the changes that occur in the Buffy-Coat are similar to the ones that were described in 2004, but this presentation by Van der Meer is in 2015, meaning that those 11 years have not improved very much in the results. Basically, there was an alteration in metabolic indicators. There is an enhanced expression of CD62, and Exin5 is increased, collagen aggregation is reduced, and ATP aggregation is reduced. But if you look at the two last columns, you will see that there are significant differences when platelets have been stored in the platelet additive solutions. And I will explain that a portion of those could be because of the dilutional effect of the platelet additive solutions in these PRTs. As for Theraflex, Theraflex has been used in Buffy-Coat, and it's a technology that can only be used until now in platelet concentrate stored in platelet additive solutions. Again, the pattern is basically the same. The pH goes down, the platelet concentration is reduced, not significant, lactate is enhanced, and glucose is reduced. I mean, if they are more or less significant data, it may come at 5 days, 6 days, but basically this is a pattern that repeats. In this case, swelling is very well preserved, pretty well preserved, hypotonic responses is well preserved, and the aggregations induced by supramaximal concentrations of aggregant agents, it's moderately out there, CD62 overexpressed, and an Exin5 doesn't seem significantly affected, but again, the information on Theraflex is more reduced. In a sense, if I want to summarize this pattern. This slide shows the pattern of changes that I have been explained, and they happen irrespectively of the methodology used, of the cell separator, of the plastic pack used, the presence of apheresis or Buffy-Coat platelets, or the use of platelet additive solutions with some differences. Glucose is reduced, lactate is increased, pH is reduced, and that could go with alterations in mitochondria, with alterations in gases. And if you look at the other indirect markers, CD62 goes up, and the percent of glycoproteins tend to be lower, reduced, as measured by flow cytometry, and the aggregation seems more affected than the presence of glycoproteins. I will come back to that later. People would like to know if there is one pathogen reduction technology that is better than the other, and if there are any comparative studies. Well, we found 5. And in here you have one, I didn't expect this slide, but it's there. Basically, it was Picker again that in 2009 presented results on the pH value of glucose and lactate. And basically, I stands for intercept and M stands for mirasol. And you can see in this study, mirasol seemed to be better than intercept in the preservation of these parameters. This is one study. There was another study by Picker in the same year in which she studied the aggregation induced by trap and the covered surface in a system, in a flow system. And in a sense, what she found is that mirasol units perform better than intercept units. And of course, they perform less than controls. But in a sense, you have 2 studies that basically found that mirasol could be better than intercept. But there are other studies, and I am summarizing another one in here. It's a very interesting one by Abonek. And in this case, he found the opposite. As you can see, for this author, untreated or amotosalen-treated platelet concentrates intercept were almost normal, as you can see, by the open squares. And in that study, riboflavin, mirasol, or UV, they will perform worse, much worse than the intercept. An interesting finding of that study is when using UVB light that is used by riboflavin, they were able to find changes induced by the UV light in the absence of the photosensitizer. But if I want to summarize these comparative studies, and we use soccer example, I think that they will be tight. Basically, there are 3 studies, 1, 2, and 3, that in which mirasol performed better than intercept. And there are 2 more studies that they found exactly the opposite. I think that those studies were not compared head-to-head. The authors were using both technologies, but they were not comparing head-to-head the technologies. So basically, I would say that we cannot say that one of these technologies is better than the other. This slide summarizes what I have been explaining, and the main findings is that the storage lesion is enhanced by pathogen reduction technologies. They are accelerated. And the introduction of new technologies, new plastic bags, new cell separators has not changed that very much. And that newer formulation of platelet additive solutions may partially mitigate the effects of the pathogen reduction technologies, but still do not improve the results over the control. So the pathogen, the platelet additive solutions is something we have to use, but we do not expect them to improve what we have found until now. But the real truth is that the pathogen-reduced platelet meet the standards of quality for platelet concentrates established by different regulatory agencies, and as such, they can be used for transfusion. Then one would expect, and I'm going to check my time. Yes, I'm going to go fast right now. The basics of one, we expect that proteomics will solve the doubt about the quality of these platelet concentrates. It is not the case. The alterations in proteins observed in platelet concentrates, standard platelet concentrates, affected cytoskeletal reorganization, alteration in signaling pathways, and oxidative mechanisms, and translational modifications on phosphorylation mechanisms. And these have been confirmed by different technologies. If we go to the proteomics when using intercept, the first surprising is that when you use amotosalen and you compare it with gamma irradiation, it is surprising that there's more effect of gamma irradiation than amotosalen in this. And again, if you use this in the day 1, this is very impressive, and if you use in the on day 5 of storage, the changes are maintained, but the incident, the effects of gamma irradiation are less important. But still, there is an overlap. There is an overlap of proteins that they seem to be affected by the different technologies. So basically, in a sense, is that on day 1 of storage, gamma irradiation may have some effects that could be maintained until day 5 of storage. This is, I'm showing is a study on Theraflex that they compare with UVB light that is used by mirasol, and they use gels, two-dimensional gels. And again, what they identified is that UVC, that is the one used by Theraflex, had some impact on the proteome, and that UVB could also affect the proteomics by itself. And that gamma irradiation again was able to introduce changes in this proteomic pattern. So, and again, an important overlap of the technologies. If we want to summarize this, is that basically what they found, the proteomic studies have found, is that modifications in proteins are the same ones that they were already communicated for the standard platelet concentrate. Modification in proteins involved in cytoskeleton assembly, like protein activation and phosphorylation and reducing metabolism. But what is interesting is the comments of the 5 studies that we summarize, is that all the 3 pathogen reduction technologies have a weak impact on the proteome of platelets, and there are no distinctive proteomic fingerprint reported with any of these pathogen reduction technologies. Importantly, is that it seems that platelets can still synthesize protein despite the exposure to pathogen reduction technologies. And again, there was specific alteration more pronounced for gamma irradiation. Going to the last portion of my talk, basically what I'm going to show in this is a critical appraisal of some of the results in a summarized way. I already talked that the reduction in the presence of glycoproteins is relatively mild, and the reduction in platelet aggregation, it's very affected, and this is contradictory. Yes, coming back to something that we have said is that probably why I'm saying this, because if you have a patient that lacks glycoprotein 1b, which is a Bernard-Soulier, or you have a patient with a Glasgow thrombasthenia that lacks GP2B3A, the reduction in these glycoproteins, it has been demonstrated that a 50% reduction of these glycoproteins has no impact on aggregation. So these moderate reductions could not have this impact on aggregation. Probably is that there are mechanisms of signaling that are affected by the pathogen reduction technologies, but you can recover some of these some of these damages by exposing platelets to epinephrine. In here on the left, you have the aggregation on the first day using low concentrations of resuscitating collagen, arachidonic acid, and ADP. On 5 days after the pathogen reduction technologies, the aggregations have been reduced very dramatically. But if you use a little bit of epinephrine in combination with the aggregating agent, you get a restoration of the aggregation. And that is interesting because probably epinephrine is restoring some of these phosphorylation mechanisms that are initially affected by the pathogen reduction technologies. This is just an example of something that sometimes authors will play tricks. And in here I'm showing that basically one of these comparative studies by Van Hals showed that there was a reduction using studies on the flow condition. There was a reduction in the interaction of platelets when they have been treated with riboflavin. This is on the top left. And there were statistical significant differences. But if you look in reality to the second group of images, what the authors have done, they have changed the size of the graph. And what was 10 in the left one is now 8, the second one. So one doesn't know very well that if there is an effect of the pathogen reduction technologies or the controls were not comparable. So these are critical aspects that sometimes are not very well measured when evaluating these studies. Basically, the authors say that intercept mainly affects platelet activation, while mirasol accelerates platelet storage lesion. And as a person in the platelet field, I don't know very well if one of these leads to the other or which one goes first. So what we are always saying, and we have used annular perfusion device because the studies on the flow conditions, I think that they provide the best information on what we should measure. Basically, I want to show that this is a slide in which we are showing the last one. You see that controls, they perform very well. Platelets stored for 7 days in SSP have a reduced interaction, and the same for pathogen reduction technologies. But when we add some fibrinogen and some albumin factor, we demonstrate that there is an enhancement in the interaction. So the hemodilation caused by the pathogen additive, by the platelet additive solution is important. There are techniques that you can use. Confocal microscopy, you will use less blood for those perfusion studies, and basically you can measure it, but you need technology. And I want to spend just a couple of minutes talking about the t-test technology. That is a technology that probably could be used for a better evaluation of the impact of pathogen reduction technologies. The t-test technology, what produces a tracing, as you can see in blue on the left, and this is before transfusion, and this is after transfusion. The cartridges work well in conditions of thrombocytopenia, and they measure the occlusion time and the area under the curve. Occlusion time is reduced after transfusion, and that is very important. And this is a technique that you could have in any lab, and it's just a matter of getting more information. The t-test is promising because evaluate the platelet function in minutes, provide hemostatic performance in the thrombocytopenic patient. You can study in vitro the effect of the platelet concentrate being transfused, and you still can perform studies in vivo using blood from the same patient after transfusion of the platelet concentrates. I don't want to extend now more because I think that I have overcome my time. But in a sense, conclusions is that pathogen reduction technologies have homogeneous and interchangeable detrimental action on the in vitro quality of the platelet concentrates, have relative impact on the overall proteome. Gamma irradiation should be more studied, especially when it's combined with pathogen reduction technologies. And the impact of all these alterations on clinical effectiveness should be confirmed in randomized clinical trials. That is something that Dr. Jem McCullough is going to show us in the third talk.